Hello, greetings. I'm here to share a brief teaching on the, how do I say, the Hebraic faith, the roots of much of the faith that we profess right now, and trying to explain it from in a very basic level. Pretty much why I want to do this is because I've been following the Hebraic Way for about 3 years now, 2 or 3 years, and maybe we may to better grasp it, it's the Messianic faith, Hebraic faith, Torah observer. I mean, they're all words, labels. I mean, it's simply put Hebraic way, but they're all kind of share similar roots and everything. But I'm trying to explain the basic roots of what most of the faith that we profess today come from, and why we need to return to that, and why I believe this, and why I believe in following it. So the reason I want to do this is because I found that the many people that follow that are Torah observers, when you talk about their faith and they grasp it and they explain it to people, it always gets to all the what do we do now? Or what are all our things that we do? What are all our reasons? What do we do now? And it's kind of like they can't really express the why to it. It's always the what do we do? What do we do now? Like, we now wear tzitzits. We now observe Sabbath. We now observe the feast. We now read the Torah and study it. But it doesn't do justice for the whole thing. I found that it's a very difficult thing to explain the why behind it. So that's my attempt, because I want to express more of the concept of it to people that are just like, oh, you're just returning to legalism. You're returning to the Torah. You're returning to the faith of the Jews, the Judaizers. You're leaving the Christian faith and you're becoming something totally else. And I want to explain the concept to it instead of this is what we do, because what doesn't change people's heart? The why does. The why, the concept of it, the why behind it more so does. So pretty much the start of is the why behind it is I've tried to grasp this for a while, or express it, because I even would fall into, when I'd talk about it, I'm like, this is what we do now. And I would even struggle doing it. So I know when we came under this about 2-3 years ago in 2023, we were influenced by this call for a massive prayer and fast for Israel. Honestly, by this ministry called the International House of Prayer. Anyway, I was convicted to do it, and I did. During that time, the Lord tenderized my heart to have more of a compassion for Israel, because during the time of that fast, there were a lot of devotionals and scriptures related specifically to Israel, the beloved ones of the Lord's heart. And during that time, I just focus and meditate upon those verses. During the time, myself and my wife, our hearts really were influenced and tenderized toward them. And it went to another step of starting to sit under other teachers that understood the Torah, the Messianic Way, the faith based from a Torah foundational basis. And we just slowly changed one thing after the other. And for a year, we probably couldn't explain our why even then. There's a few concepts here that I could say, but while we slowly changed from one thing to the next of the various things we were doing, we could probably still explain, okay, we're now doing this. We're now observing Sabbath. We're now studying the Torah. We're now wearing tzitzits, and we're now celebrating and learning the 7 biblical feasts of the Bible. So we were still grasping the different trivial questions of what we are doing now and the shifts that were happening. I mean, on a basic level, I probably would have said, we during that time we began to understand the Bible from a more Torah basis than a New Testament basis. And I'll kind of explain that later. But to get to it, a few of the whys are, to go after the concept is, we didn't need to understand the trivial things up front, and why people started to say, you need to see it from this perspective. You need to start doing things this way. Because if people came to me saying, you need to start doing this, it wouldn't have changed us. But we started to accept just rapidly all these new concepts was because our hearts were already tenderized by God to embrace it. He had already touched our hearts to say, I want you to begin to see things differently. And then it just went down this domino effect. It was our why had already happened. We did it because, why did we do it? Because Yah said so. He spoke to our hearts. And when you can touch someone's heart, it's much more easy to influence someone. It goes beyond just intellectual persuasion or Torahism apologetics. Let's compare it to, you meet somebody like you do street ministry, and you go up to somebody and you see that they have a sore back, sore neck, they're blind or something's broken, and you pray for them and they are healed. Now, you don't need to convince them if they were previously not a believer to the point of, God's real and He loves you. You need to believe in Him. Like, you don't need to convince them that because their heart already has been touched by the power of God. It's real easy to influence them and teach them something new, to teach them the gospel. They're already tenderized. Their why has already happened. It doesn't even happen in the form of words. It happens in the form of power. That's why it's easier to persuade somebody that's seen and felt the power of God versus someone who is already well guarded with their faith and has a very religious traditional foundation because it's founded upon what they trust and is safe to them. And it's hard to get them to change to something new before God changes their hearts, where maybe their hearts change in the moment and they're very more influential, or God has them on a path to be seeking something new, much easier. So that's kind of the difference. So a few of the things I would come up with to explain the why behind it. Like I said, it's hard to do because I typically go back to what do we do now. So one of the things I would say is the why behind why we follow the Messiah, Yeshua, in a new way. Why we even call him by this name that we see is more relevant and accurate to his name is one of the reasons is we needed to understand the full story of the Bible from a foundational premise of the Torah that then could look at the writings of the Gospels, the letters, and the Apocalypse through the proper lens. What that pretty much means is we began to understand the foundation of God's revelation to man through the covenant of Abraham and Moses, the Davidic covenants, and all the teachings that are found under those subsets, those topics, to begin to build our faith on those premises, on those basic building blocks, and then allowing us to then see the new covenant that Yeshua brought in the proper lens. And what this really means is to really contrast how this is different is a believer, a Christian, has come into the faith through the new covenant, through the gospel. And then that's their premise. That's their foundation. And eventually they begin to read the Old Testament, the Torah, but they then see the Old Testament based on a new covenant, gospels, letters perspective. So it looks back to them and then understands it. So where what they believe now is the foundation, and then they take all these other things and then just see it through that lens. Where someone who comes under the Torah sees it as the building blocks have been put into place, and then they understand the gospel that builds upon it. It's layer upon layer upon layer until you get to the final layer of the new covenant or the renewed covenant. It's built upon them instead of replacing them entirely, where you see it from an Old Testament Torah perspective to the New Testament versus the New Testament back to the Old Testament. It's a totally different paradigm shift. Another concept, a very basic why is because the expression of the faith has been more shaped by the story of the Torah than anything else ever written in historical matters. Maybe a better way to say it is so much of our contemporary faith of following Jesus, Yeshua, it's based on more of a historical leading and teaching of it built upon fractured foundations. And more of history has been shaped by this in the Christian faith. And so we need to go back to the roots that properly built it upon to see where there's errors. Another one is we need to understand the biblical message of Yahweh or God's plan to save a people through the covenant that was originally given to an ethnical people. So we understand the plan first as he first communicated to them. This is not to contrast that it's wrong to come into our faith through just the New Covenant, New Testament, Gospels perspective. That's still the way to go, because we're entering in through that where the whole story is put together. So we just teach the concept of the gospel and how it works through Messiah has come, he's died on the cross for our sins, he's risen from the dead to conquer death and sin. He's left the world, promising he'll come back for his kingdom, and then later pours out his Holy Spirit so we can walk with God dwelling in our hearts. That doesn't change. But once we have that, we need to go back and understand the full story and the full foundation that it's built upon, rather than the other way around. So we need to go back to and understand how the Jews understand it from a covenant to covenant basis building up to the New Testament. Another way is to say is we need to also understand our why, as far as like why we do this, because we need to make a shift from reading about the Hebrews in the Old Testament to the so-called mindset of we are reading about what they went through or what their story was, to we are a part of that story when you understand the Torah. Meaning, the words that when Moses, before he left the Hebrews wandering in the wilderness and he's about to pass on, he gave this final speech, and one of the things he said was, I do not give you these things, teach you these things for those who are present, but also for those who are not here even now. Referring to a future generation. That's us. It's going after the... No, I'll probably stop there. Another concept is our why is Yeshua, Jesus Yeshua needs a people that are walking in his Torah when his kingdom comes. Jesus Yeshua needs a people that are walking in his Torah when his kingdom comes. When he returns, there'll be a whole people that understand his Torah and the full concept of the kingdom and what the Messiah really comes back to do. Because so many of us will misunderstand totally what a Messiah comes when he comes back to sit on the throne in Israel without understanding the full picture. That's another one of the whys. Why do we do this? Another one is we need to fully break off from the so-called church sect that's separated from the faith of the, maybe around our, that's called the church, not the sect, but the church religion that separated from the faith of the disciples in Acts several centuries after it. Because the so-called church or the Roman Catholic Church have influenced the body, or the body that sees from the body that sees the Torah as a thing done away with. Or let me say it better, we need to break off from the church or the Roman Catholic body that has greatly influenced the body today, that sees the Torah as a done away thing. So from the 7th century, the 4th century and that followed is more influential of today's faith than the one of the apostles in the Gospels and in Acts. There's a whole thing to unravel there, but it's pretty much to say is so much of our faith today has been affected by how the Roman Catholic Church began to build up the so-called church. Not all is lost, not all is failed. I'm not saying we're all entirely heretics, that we've come into that path, but we do need to go back to and uproot so much of the wrong teachings of our practices and ecclesia today, because they're built upon the wrong thing, because they did not understand how we were meant to be just a sect broken off from Judaism or Hebraic Way. We're not much to be a people that were totally a different religion. Another thing is to say is we need to return to our Hebrew roots. And what does that mean? You have to understand what Hebrew means. The word Hebrew translates crossover. This is the original crossover that Yahweh called Abraham into. It's a conceptual idea more so than an ethnical one. This was why Paul spoke repeatedly that we share the same faith as Abraham, and why those being saved now are grafted into Israel are as much a part of that body as the Messianic believing Jews are. This concept doesn't mean we all need to become Jews, but we do need to learn Yah's revelation of his plan through the covenants like the Jews. And until you start doing it, you don't realize how much we see ourselves as the church versus Israel, or church Christians versus Jews, than saying we are all Hebraic. We're all part of this covenant of the believing faith. Last thing is, we need to truly understand who Israel is. That all believers, all believers accept the concept of being grafted into Israel as Christians coming in, but we need to grasp the full idea what this brings in. If you don't know the Torah as foundational like the Jews, you can't grasp the full idea. And when you do, you recognize if we are truly grafted in, you take that to its full extreme, that we will then accept the full teachings of the Torah for the Israel that was already in, that did not need to be grafted in. We need to walk according to what they were first called to walk in, because we are now grafted in. We are the so-called sojourners that now embrace the faith of the Jews of the land. That's another thing to grasp. But we have been grafted in. We accept the full message. So we need to also do what God spoke to people from all time and from Genesis through Deuteronomy. And then everything was built upon that. And then to properly build the teachings of Jesus, Yeshua, and the apostles, to how those things clarified everything else and built the full message in full color. So those are just some of the basic concepts of our why. I'm hoping to put this out there for more Messianics, Hebraic, whatever you call them, Torah observers, scraps. These are the things we need to communicate to people, more so than what are we doing now, because these are the reasons to why we start doing things differently. So I just want to leave it there. Blessings. Feel free to ask me any comments. I'll leave in the bottom for me.